Welcome back to the deep dive. We are trying something a little distinct today.
Mm-hmm.
Usually we take a piece of research or a new book or a complex scientific theory and we really drill down into the mechanics of it. But today, we are deep diving into a date.
Which sounds, on the surface, like it's going to be a trivia challenge.
It does, it really does. But the sources we have in front of us paint a very different picture. We're looking at February 4th.
Right.
And we aren't just listing things that happened on this day like some, calendar app. We're looking at a concept the source material calls the unbroken chain.
And it's this idea, which is really fascinating, that if you look at this one date across 3 different centuries, you're not seeing random events.
Yeah.
You're seeing a distinct evolution in how freedom is declared across the African diaspora. It moves from the halls of government to the individual body, to the international stage, and then finally to armed conflict.
We are going to trace that evolution. We have 4 stops on this timeline. Revolutionary Paris in 1794.
Tuskegee, Alabama in 1913.
Cape Town in 1960, and Luanda, Angola in 1961. And the framework the researchers provided is what they call the 4 modes of declaring freedom.
Yeah, and what stands out to me in this framework is the progression of agency. I mean, we start with freedom being given by a government.
And we end with it being seized by the people.
Exactly.
So let's start at the beginning of that chain, the legislative declaration. We have to transport ourselves to February 4, 1794.
Okay.
The French Revolution is at its absolute peak. The terror is in full swing, the guillotine is busy, and we are inside the National Convention in Paris.
It's so important to visualize this room. It's chaotic, it's loud, it's dangerous. And on this specific day, 16 Pluviose, year 2, 3 men walk in who are about to change the history of the Atlantic world.
Who were they?
You have Louis-Pierre Dufay, a white colonist, Jean-Baptiste Mills, a mixed-race freeman, and then Jean-Baptiste Billy, a formerly enslaved black man who had actually bought his own freedom.
And the sources really make a big deal about their arrival. This wasn't some standard diplomatic mission.
No, not at all. They were coming from Saint-Domingue.
What we now know as Haiti.
Exactly, Haiti. And they weren't just there to observe, they were there to validate a reality that the politicians in Paris were kind of trying to ignore.
What was that reality?
Well, the story we often get in school is that the benevolent French Republic freed the slaves. But the truth on the ground was that the slaves had already freed themselves. The Haitian Revolution started back in 1791.
Right.
So by 1793, the French commissioners in Haiti had already issued local emancipation decrees.
And that was a military move, wasn't it? To stop the enslaved population from defecting to the British or the Spanish who were invading the island?
100%. It was a military necessity. So when these 3 delegates arrive in Paris on February 4th, they are essentially presenting the National Convention with a fait accompli.
They're saying, look, we are free, we are fighting for France, are you with us or not?
Precisely. And the reaction in the convention wasn't some sober debate. The accounts describe it as spontaneous enthusiasm.
People throwing their hats in the air, embracing the delegates, they vote to abolish slavery in all colonies right then and there, without debate.
It was a moment of absolute, Jacobin idealism. The decree itself is just stunning. It says, the National Convention declares the abolition of Negro slavery in all the colonies.
That goes further.
It does. It says, in consequence, it decrees that all men, without distinction of color, residing in the colonies are French citizens.
And that citizenship part, that's the real kicker. They didn't just say, you aren't property. They said, you are French.
It was the first time any colonial empire had legally recognized universal racial equality. This is the legislative declaration. But we have to look at the politics of it.
Okay.
The Jacobins, the radicals running the show, they used this moment to bludgeon their moderate opponents. It was a way to say, look how virtuous we are.
And that political utility is exactly why this mode of freedom, the legislative declaration, is so fragile.
Fragile is the perfect word. It's top down. It's a gift from the state.
And what the state gives.
The state can take away.
Which is exactly what happened just 8 years later.
Yes. The pendulum swings back, the revolution cools down, Napoleon Bonaparte takes power, and his priorities are different. He wants to restore the sugar economy.
He needs to make peace with the colonial lobby.
Right. So in 1802, he just reinstates slavery.
It's just devastating to read about. That unbroken chain just snaps right there.
Well, it highlights the limitation of that legislative mode. When your freedom relies on a piece of paper signed in a capital city thousands of miles away, you aren't truly secure. You're subject to the whims of the next dictator.
So The lesson from February 4, 1794, is that the law is necessary, but it's not enough. It's reversible.
Which creates this vacuum. If the law fails you, where does the Declaration of Freedom go? It has to retreat from the public square into the private individual. It becomes internalized.
And this brings us to the next link in the chain. We jump forward over a century to February 4, 1913. We're in Tuskegee, Alabama.
The birth of Rosa Louise Macaulay.
Or, as the world knows her, Rosa Parks. And I want to pause here because I feel like Rosa Parks is someone everyone thinks they know but usually gets wrong.
Oh, absolutely.
We have this cultural myth of the tired seamstress who just had sore feet one day and decided not to move.
That myth is actually quite dangerous because it strips her of her agency, of her intellect. It makes her resistance seem like an accident.
Right.
But the sources we're looking at today make it very clear. Rosa Parks was a trained political operative.
Operative is a strong word, but you're right, it fits. By the time of the bus boycott in 1955, she'd been the secretary of the Montgomery NAACP for over a decade.
She investigated sexual assaults against Black women, and crucial to this whole discussion, she had attended the Highlander Folk School just months before her arrest.
Highlander is key. Explain what that was.
It was a training ground for labor organizers and civil rights activists. She studied nonviolent resistance there. She learned specific tactics. So when we talk about her birth on February 4th, 1913, we see it as the origin of the embodied declaration.
Okay, so define that for us. How is the embodied declaration different from the legislative one we just saw in Paris?
The legislative declaration is permission. It says, you may be free. The embodied declaration is an assertion. It says, I am free. When Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat, she wasn't waiting for the Supreme Court. She wasn't petitioning the city council. She was using her physical body to jam the gears of the machine.
It's a reclamation of space.
Exactly. And unlike the French decree, which came from the top down, this power comes from the bottom up. It creates a crisis the system can't ignore. You mentioned the fragility of the law. Well, it's much harder to repeal a human being who refuses to cooperate.
But the personal cost is so much higher. In Paris, politicians cheered. In Alabama, Rosa Parks lost her job. She got death threats. She had to leave the state.
That is the trade-off. The embodied declaration is more durable, but it requires immense personal sacrifice. It's not just one day on a bus. It's the 42 years of life since her birth on February 4th that prepared her for that moment.
So we have the law, which is brusque but fragile. We have the body, which is resilient but costly. But there's another level, isn't there, when the system itself starts to realize the tide is turning.
And this is where the chain stretches back across the ocean to Africa. We're going to Cape Town, South Africa.
The date is February 3rd, 1960. And I know the sticklers will say that's not February 4th.
Right, but historically it's grouped into this chain because of how the news cycle and the reaction played out immediately after. It sits squarely in this timeline.
And the setting is incredibly tense. You're the Parliament of South Africa. The National Party is in power.
They're building the legal architecture of apartheid. It's brutal. And into this room walks Harold Macmillan, the Prime Minister of Great Britain.
A conservative prime minister.
Yeah.
An old-school establishment figure.
Yes. This is not some radical, but he stands up and delivers what becomes known as the Wind of Change speech. He says, the wind of change is blowing through this continent. This growth of national consciousness is a political fact.
I reread that speech. It's such a strange moment. What was his goal? Was he just trying to sound progressive?
No, this is what we call the rhetorical declaration. Macmillan was a pragmatist. He looked at the balance sheet of the British Empire and realized it was in the red.
He saw the writing on the wall.
He saw it. The independence movements in Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, they were unstoppable. He realized that if the West wanted to keep any influence in Africa, especially with the Cold War heating up, they had to stop fighting nationalism and start courting it.
So he was basically telling the white minority government in South Africa, the party's over. We aren't going to protect you anymore.
He was cutting them loose, signaling that the legitimacy of colonial rule had just evaporated. And that is powerful. Rhetoric often gets dismissed as just words, but when the head of the British Empire says colonialism is dead, it validates every freedom fighter on the continent.
It strips the oppressor of their moral cover.
Yes.
But how did the room react?
Ice cold. The South African Prime Minister, Hendrik Verwoerd, immediately got up and rejected it. He doubled down on apartheid. He basically said, we are white Africans and we aren't going anywhere.
So the rhetorical declaration failed to move the hardliners.
It failed to change their hearts, yes, but it emboldened the oppressed. However, there were some regimes that wouldn't listen to laws or protests, and they certainly didn't care about speeches.
Which brings us to the Portuguese.
The Portuguese dictatorship under Salazar had a totally different view. They claimed Angola and Mozambique weren't colonies, they were overseas provinces.
Integral parts of Portugal.
Yes, they had absolutely no intention of leaving.
And this leads to our final and most violent link in the chain.
Yeah.
February 4th, 1961. Exactly 1 year after Macmillan's speech. We are in Luanda, Angola.
And the atmosphere is at a boiling point. The Portuguese secret police, the PID, are cracking down. Dissent is illegal. So the armed declaration begins.
Describe what happened that morning. This wasn't some, traditional military operation, was it?
No, and that's what makes it so visceral. We're talking about militants from the MPLA, the Popular Movement for the Liberation of Angola. They didn't have heavy weaponry. They had machetes, clubs,
Few stolen guns.
and they stormed the São Paulo prison and police barracks.
Their objective was to free political prisoners.
Primarily, yes, and to seize the radio station to announce the revolution. But we have to be clear about the immediate outcome. It was a tactical disaster.
They failed.
They failed. The Portuguese security forces were better armed, better prepared. They repelled the attacks. The sources estimate around 40 attackers were killed. No prisoners were freed.
So if it was a failure, why is this a crucial link? Why is February 4th a national holiday in Angola today?
Because it shattered the silence. Until that machete struck the prison gate, there was a myth that the Portuguese colonies were peaceful. This act proved that was a lie. It forced Portugal to commit a massive military force to Angola, which drained their economy and eventually led to the collapse of the dictatorship back in Lisbon.
But there's a complexity here. The MPLA wasn't the only group, was it?
That's a critical piece of context. You had the MPLA, which was urban and Marxist-leaning, but you also had the FNLA in the north and later UNITA in the south. This raid was also the MPLA asserting itself as the leader of the revolution.
So it kicked off a war not just against the Portuguese, but eventually a civil war between these factions.
It did, and that brings up the immense cost of the armed declaration. We saw the cost for Rosa Parks harassment, threats, but the cost here was a 14-year independence war followed by decades of civil war. It's the last resort mode.
When all else fails.
When the legislative route is blocked, when the embodied route is suppressed, and when the rhetorical route is ignored, history suggests violence becomes inevitable.
So let's step back and look at this entire thing, the unbroken chain. We have February 4th in 1794, 1913, 1960, and 1961.
It's like a taxonomy of freedom. 1794, the law tries to grant freedom from above.
1913, the individual is born to embody freedom from within.
1960, the empire admits via rhetoric that freedom is inevitable.
1961, the people initiate force to seize freedom when nothing else has worked.
Exact.
It's not just a list of dates. It's a progression of intensity, it feels like. Like the universe trying different keys in a lock until one finally turns.
And notice the shift. In 1794 and 1960, the actor is the government, the French Convention, the British Prime Minister.
Right.
But in 1913 and 1961, the actor is the oppressed Rosa Parks, the MPLA fighters. The change shows agency shifting from the hands of the powerful to the hands of the people.
Makes you wonder about the permanence of these modes. We said the law was reversible. Rhetoric can be ignored. Force. Well, force can win the war but lose the peace.
That's the big question, isn't it? If you look at this chain, which link is the strongest? I keep coming back to the embodied declaration.
Why that one specifically?
Because the French decree was revoked, the Angolan raid led to factional chaos, the wind of change speech was just words until people acted on them. But the Rosa Parks model, that internal decision that I am free and you cannot compel me otherwise, that seems to be the atomic unit of liberty.
You can put the body in jail, but you can't reverse the transformation in the mind?
Right. The embodied declaration is the only one that cannot be repealed.
You can repeal a law.
Yeah.
You can crush a rebellion.
But you can't repeal a consciousness.
That's a heavy thought to land on. It suggests that while we look at history as these big, sweeping movements, armies, parliaments, treaties, the most indestructible link in the chain might just be one person deciding they've had enough.
And being trained and ready to act on that decision when the moment strikes.
Well, this has been quite a journey. From Paris to Alabama to Southern Africa, all pivoting around a single date on the calendar.
It certainly gives you something to think about when February 4th rolls around next year.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you for walking us through the chain today.
My pleasure.
And to you listening, thanks for diving deep with us. Keep pulling on those threads of history. You never know what you'll find connected on the other end. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.